The sky above King's Landing was grey, and the air thick with tension. Inside the Red Keep, the silence was louder than war drums. Eddard Stark, Lord of Winterfell, Hand of the King, sat alone in the black cell, waiting for death. But fate, as cruel and unpredictable as a northern storm, decided otherwise. Lord Tywin Lannister arrived in the capital days earlier than expected. He had marched with a great host, expecting battle, but found chaos. King Robert was dead, his son Joffrey had taken the throne, and Ned Stark was a prisoner, accused of treason. The city was barely holding itself together. When Tywin heard of Ned's arrest, he was furious, not because he cared for the North or the Starks, but because Queen Cersei had acted without his approval. She had risked war with Winterfell and the Riverlands, all for her pride. Tywin knew that killing Ned Stark would turn the entire North into a battlefield, and Tywin Lannister didn't start wars he couldn't win. Instead of pushing for execution, Tywin did something no one expected. He demanded something no one expected. He demanded a trial for Eddard Stark, a real one. One that would save face for the crown and possibly buy peace. In the great hall of the Red Keep, under the watchful eyes of the court, Ned was brought forth. He looked broken, weak from days in the cell. His grey eyes, once full of honor, now only held pain. But even in chains, he stood tall. Grand Maester Pycelle read the charges. Queen Cersei sat beside her son, her expression like stone. Littlefinger watched with interest, knowing he had played both sides too well. Varys, quiet as always, observed every move. But then, Tywin stood. "The North does not forget," he said, his voice calm and heavy. "Kill Lord Stark, and the Riverlands and the North will rise. Blood will flood the kingdoms. I say we offer mercy, in wisdom, and wisdom." Joffrey opened his mouth to protest, but Tywin raised a hand. The boy king, not yet bold enough to defy his grandfather, fell silent. And so it was decided. Ned Stark would live. He would take the black, return to the wall, and leave politics behind. A deal made in shadows, sealed with quiet nods. When Sansa heard the news, she wept. Arya, still hiding in the streets, didn't know her father had been saved. Catelyn, in Riverrun, clutched the Raven's message to her chest and fell to her knees in thanks. Ned was released under guard. He was thinner, slower, but alive. Before he left, he was allowed one final meeting with his daughters. Sansa clung to him like a child, begging to come with him. He kissed her forehead and whispered, "Be strong, my little dove." Arya came later, brought in secret by Varys. She threw her arms around Ned, her wild hair in her eyes. "I'm not leaving you," she said. "You must," he replied softly. "But I'll see you again, I promise." He didn't know if it was a lie. The journey to the wall was long and cold. Ned rode in silence, guarded by men loyal to Tywin. He didn't trust them, but he had no choice. Somewhere in his heart, he still believed in honor. That belief had almost killed him once, but now it gave him purpose. When he reached Castle Black, Jon Snow met him at the gates. The reunion was silent, filled with emotion neither dared speak aloud. "You're not supposed to be here," Jon said. "I could say the same to you," Ned replied with a tired smile. The wall stood tall, ancient and cold. Beyond it, dark things stirred. Ned looked north, his breath misting in the air. He had escaped death, but war was still coming. And the realm he knew was already starting to change. At Castle Black, the cold wasn't just in the air, it was in the bones, in the silence, and in the stares of the men who didn't understand why a great lord had come to live like a criminal. Ned Stark kept to himself. He rose early, helped with training, and never spoke of King's Landing. The younger brothers whispered behind his back, but none dared say anything to his face. He was still the Warden of the North in their eyes, even if he wore black now. Jon Snow stayed close to him. He had 1,000 questions, but he asked none. The way his father, no, his uncle, though he didn't know that, yet looked, spoke of pain far deeper than anything he could put into words. One evening, as the snow fell soft and thick around the keep, Ned and Jon stood at the top of the wall. The wind howled like ghosts from another age. "They wanted me dead," Ned said quietly, as if speaking to the darkness. "I know," Jon replied, "but Tywin Lannister saved my life, not out of kindness, because it suited him." Ned looked north. Men like him always think they control the game, but they forget what's beyond that wall, what's coming. Jon nodded. "Something's out there. Sam saw it. I saw it too." Ned didn't doubt him. After everything he'd seen in King's Landing, the lies, the betrayal, the ambition monsters in the woods didn't seem so strange anymore. Back in the capital, Tywin's plan was slowly falling apart. Joffrey was growing bolder, refusing counsel. He insulted Tywin in front of the court, called him old and slow. Cersei, drunk more often than not, whispered poison in her son's ear. Tywin knew that keeping Ned Stark alive had bought time, but not peace. Robb Stark had still called his banners. The Riverlands were already in chaos. And then came the Raven. Ned Stark was alive, and word had spread. In Winterfell, Bran was sitting as lord, but the northern lords were restless. They hadn't forgotten the insult. Alive or dead, their warden had been dragged in chains before a boy-king. The Karstarks wanted war. The Umbers howled for blood. Robb marched anyway. He crossed the neck, not with the full north behind him, but with enough men to be dangerous. His goal wasn't just vengeance anymore. It was to break the South's control. He sent ravens to Riverrun, to the Vale, even to Stannis Baratheon. Robb Stark, the boy who once followed his father's quiet honor, now played a harder game, a colder one. Back at the wall, ravens came almost daily now. Robb wanted advice, but Ned could not answer. He was sworn to the Night's Watch, and the black cloak was more than cloth. It was a vow. But he read every letter with heavy eyes and shaking hands. "Go to him," Jon said one night after reading Robb's latest message. "He needs you." "I can't," Ned replied, his voice hard. "If I break my vows, I'm no better than those who betrayed me." Jon looked away, angry and helpless. "And what good is honor when your children die for it?" That question stayed with Ned long into the night. And then another raven came, but not from Robb. This one carried a message sealed with the mark of Varys, the spider. "Cersei knows you live. She wants it undone. Tywin is losing control. Be careful. The wall may not protect you for long." Ned burned the letter, but not the fear it planted in his heart. He knew Varys wasn't warning him out of kindness. It meant things were shifting. He had survived the lion's den once, but the lions were coming north now. That night, Ned Stark climbed the wall again, alone. He looked into the endless black forest and whispered to the wind, "What if I had died? Would my son be safer? Would the realm be better?" But the wind had no answers. It only carried the cold, and far beyond the wall, blue eyes opened in the dark. Winter had come early to Castle Black. Snow piled against the walls like silent warnings, and the cold sank deeper each night. But it wasn't just the weather changing it, but it wasn't just the feeling. A tension, a whisper in the shadows. The brothers of the Night's Watch muttered of strange sightings in the woods, fires going out, dead animals, stiff and cold, found with no wounds. Ned Stark felt it too. He had lived long enough to know the difference between fear and superstition. What he felt now was worse. It was the same feeling he had the day Jon Arryn died, the start of something unstoppable. One morning, a rider arrived, half frozen, wounded, and barely able to speak. He collapsed at the gates and only whispered one word before losing consciousness. White. They dragged him to the maester, who tried to save him. But it was too late. The man died before sunset, and when they burned his body, the flames hissed like they were fighting something unnatural. Ned stood beside Jon and the Lord Commander, watching the smoke rise. "Your brother marches south," Mormont said to Ned without turning, "and the real war is up here." "I know," Ned replied. Mormont looked at him. "Then why are you still wearing black?" That night, Ned sat in his chamber, staring at the sword across his knees. Ice, the great sword of House Stark, returned to him by the watch from the Stark vaults below. He had sworn to keep his vows, to die at the wall if need be. But that was before he knew the dead were walking again. If the White Walkers returned, then the wall wouldn't hold forever. And if the South kept bleeding itself dry in war and politics, no one would survive what came next. He thought of Arya, of Sansa, of Robb riding south into fire, of Bran, crippled and alone in Winterfell, of Rickon, too young to even understand what was happening. The time for honor was gone. The North needed its warden. At dawn, Ned rode from Castle Black. He left a letter behind for Jon and the Watch, apologizing, explaining. He knew what it meant breaking his vows. Desertion, death, if caught. But he had already died once. Everything after was borrowed time. His horse galloped through snow and shadow heading south. If he could reach Moat Cailin, he could rally the Northern Lords, not to fight the Lannisters, but to prepare the North, to warn them of the true enemy. But he wasn't the only one moving. In King's Landing, Cersei Lannister read the latest Raven with shaking hands. "Ned Stark escaped," she whispered. Tywin's eyes narrowed. Escaped? Or left? She slammed the letter down. He broke his vow. "That means he's fair game. I want his head before he reaches Winterfell." Tywin didn't respond at first. Then, Privaline for now. Meanwhile, Robb Stark had taken Riverrun, the Tully banner raised high. His army grew larger with each passing week. But he had made enemies too. The Freys demanded marriage. The Lannisters burned villages. And word had spread his father lived. Some lords rejoiced. Others whispered that Ned Stark should be leading this war, not a boy. Robb wrote letter after letter to Castle Black, begging his father to join him. He didn't know Ned was already riding through the north. But someone else did. Deep in the Dreadfort, Roose Bolton read the same message Cersei had sent along with a generous gift of Lannister gold. He turned to his bastard son, Ramsay, whose smile was sharp as knives. "Eddard Stark rides alone," Roose said calmly. Ramsay licked his lips. "Shall I bring you his head, father?" Roose nodded slowly, "But make it look like bandits. The North must not know who sent the wolves." And so the hunt began. Eddard Stark, once Lord of Winterfell, was now a marked man. South of the Wall, north of home, and hunted by men with no honor. His sword was ready. His heart was heavy. And behind him, in the shadows of the haunted forest, something even worse had begun to move. The dead were marching. And the living were too busy killing each other to notice. Ned Stark rode fast through the wolfswood, wind cutting across his face like blades. Snow clung to his cloak, and his horse wheezed with each step. But he didn't stop. Every second mattered. Every mile brought him closer to Winterfell, and closer to danger. He had no army, no bannerman, just ice, his old instincts, and a name that still meant something in the north. But even that wouldn't be enough against what followed him. 2 days south of Castle Black, just before dusk, Ned noticed the first sign. A deer, its body torn apart, not by wolves or blades, but with its bones twisted, limbs snapped backward. No blood, no scavengers, just silence. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat by the fire, sword in hand, eyes locked on the trees. Something was watching him. Not a man, not even a beast. Something colder. By morning, his horse refused to move. It stared north with wide, panicked eyes. Ned tried to calm it, but then he heard it too. A faint, unnatural crunch of snow. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. He turned, sword raised, and saw them. Two figures, tall, pale, inhuman, skin like ice, eyes glowing with the blue fire of death. Their weapons shimmered with frost. They moved with eerie silence, each step freezing the ground beneath them. White Walkers. Ned's blood turned to ice. He'd heard tales as a boy, whispers at the hearth, old Nan stories. But this wasn't a story. This was death, walking. He didn't run. He couldn't. He fought. The first one moved like a shadow, blades swinging low. Ned parried, barely. His greatsword clashed against the icy steel and sparks flew. The cold burned his hands, seeping through the metal. The second creature came from the side, too fast. He was going to die, right here, in the snow. Alone, but just as the blow fell, a blur struck the creature from the side. A direwolf. Grey, massive, and furious. Ghost. Jon Snow had followed him. With a roar, the direwolf leapt at the second walker, buying Ned seconds, enough for Jon to slide from his horse and toss a dragonglass dagger toward his father. Use this. Ned caught it, just as the first walker came again. This time, the dragonglass struck true. With a hiss like ice breaking, the creature shattered, pieces of glowing blue crystal vanishing in the snow. The second one turned too late. Ghost lunged for its throat, holding it long enough for Jon to drive another dagger into its chest. Gone. The forest was silent again, just the three of them. Father, son, and the wolf panting, bleeding, alive. You followed me, Ned said, breathless. Jon nodded, wiping blood from his mouth. You really thought I'd let you die again? Ned almost smiled. They burned the bodies and rode together after that, both of them shaken but bonded deeper than ever. The dead weren't legends anymore. They were real, and if they were here, south of the wall, then there wasn't a moment to waste. But as they neared the last river, trouble found them again. Not dead, this time worse. Men. 6 riders in Bolton armor, their faces covered, their blades sharp. Ramsay Bolton at the head, wearing a smirk like a mask. Well, well, Ramsay said. Father said you'd come crawling back, Stark. And here you are, with a bastard son and a tired old sword. Ned didn't flinch. Your father swore fealty to me, and sold it for gold, Ramsay sneered. We're here to collect your head. He'll send it in a box to King's Landing. Jon stepped forward. You have to kill us both. Oh, Ramsay grinned. I plan to. But Ramsay underestimated one thing, the fury of a Stark cornered. The fight was brutal. Jon fought like a storm. Ned, though tired and older, moved with the grace of a man who had spent a lifetime in war. His sword sang in the snow, cutting down men like falling leaves. In the end, only Ramsay remained, bleeding and gasping in the snow, staring up at the man he had come to kill. Ned didn't speak. He drove his sword through Ramsay's chest without a word. Mercy was for men. Ramsay was something else. By nightfall, The snow was red. And Winterfell's true lord rode home, not as a prisoner, not as a deserter, but as a warning to all who had forgotten the North remembers. The war wasn't over. The real war hadn't even begun. Winterfell rose from the snow like a ghost from the past. When the gates opened and the guards saw Eddard Stark riding at the front, silence fell over the courtyard. For a moment, no one moved. Then someone whispered, "The Lord of Winterfell," and the words spread like fire. Bran was carried into the yard, his face pale with shock. He thought he was dreaming. "Father." His voice cracked. Ned dismounted slowly. Every bone in his body ached, but his heart felt heavier. He knelt in front of Bran, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "I'm home," he said. Bran broke. Tears fell freely as he hugged his father. The lords of the North dropped to one knee without being ordered. Even the ones who had doubted, who had whispered behind closed doors, bent the knee. Because Ned Stark living changed everything. That night, the great hall was filled again. Torches burned bright. Food was served, but no one ate much. They wanted answers. Ned told them the truth about King's Landing, about Joffrey, about Tywin, and then about the White Walkers. Many laughed at first, until Jon stepped forward, until Ghost growled, until Ned placed the dragon glass dagger on the table and told them how ice shattered like glass when struck. Silence returned this time, full of fear. "The South fights for crowns and gold," Ned said calmly. "We fight for survival. If the North is divided, we die. If we kneel to the South again, we die. The dead don't care about kings." Great Jon Umber slammed his fist on the table. "Then name the enemy, Stark, and we'll bleed for it." Ned looked around the hall. "The enemy is coming from the north, but we will not face it alone." The next morning, ravens flew across the realm. To Robb at Riverrun, return home. The war has changed. To Stannis Baratheon, the throne means nothing if the dead win. To the Vale, remember your old oaths, even to King's Landing. Cersei received Ned's message with trembling hands. "I live. The wall is failing. The dead are coming. Choose wisely." She crushed the parchment. "He's lying," she said, but her eyes betrayed her fear. Tywin read the same message later, alone. He did not dismiss it. He had lived long enough to know when a man like Ned Stark spoke of monsters, he wasn't lying. Meanwhile, Roose Bolton arrived at Winterfell, acting loyal, acting calm. He bowed deeply. "My lord," he said, "the North is yours." Ned looked at him for a long moment, then, quietly, "Your son is dead." Rose's face didn't change, but something dark flickered in his eyes. "I know," he replied. Ned leaned closer. "And I know why." The hall went still. "I spared you once," Ned continued, "because the North needed unity. Betray me again, and your house ends." Roose bowed again. There will be no second betrayal. But Ned knew better. Some men didn't forget. They waited. As night fell, Jon stood atop the walls with his father. "We can't win both wars," Jon said. "South and North." Ned nodded. "Then we don't." He looked beyond the trees, toward the wall. "We let the South burn if it must. The North will stand, and when the dead come, we'll be ready." Far away, beyond ice and darkness, thousands of blue eyes opened at once. The dead had heard the call, and they were coming. Snow fell in thick silence across the north, burying roads, forests, and graves alike. But inside Winterfell, the cold had become something else, a weight. Heavier than ice, heavier than fear. Because Ned Stark had returned. And with him came truth. No one laughed anymore. The lords had gathered. Karstarks, Manderlys, Umbers, even the Glovers who once refused to march. Every one of them came not because they believed. They came because they'd seen. Bodies found frozen with open eyes. Whole villages emptied with no signs of struggle. One boy, barely alive, whispering about things with blue eyes and twisted faces. But unity came with tension. Robb Stark returned to Winterfell with his army, banners waving like fire in the wind. When he rode through the gates and saw his father alive, he didn't speak at first. He just dismounted and fell to his knees, shaking. "I thought you were dead," Robb whispered. "I was close," Ned said, pulling his son into an embrace. "But I had to return. For you. For all of us." The reunion healed much, but not everything. Robb had grown into a commander, a king in all but name. He had made decisions. He had lost men. He had spilled blood. And now, his father stood beside him again. A man revered across the north, a man whose presence shifted every conversation. Whispers started again. "Who leads now?" One night in the great hall, the silence cracked. Lord Rickard Karstark stood. "Robb Stark led us when we were lost. He earned our loyalty and blood." Then Lord Manderly rose. "But Eddard Stark has the wisdom to win the war that truly matters." Other lords followed. Some for the father, some for the son. The room filled with voices. Divided, loud, until Ned stood. Enough. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "I am no king," he said. "I broke my vows to warn you. I am a Stark of Winterfell. But this is not my war to lead. This is Robb's fight now." Robb stared at him, shocked. "Father." Ned looked him in the eyes. "But I will stand beside you until my last breath." And with that, the room changed. Not with cheers, but with resolve. Father and son, side by side. The next weeks passed in fury. Every forge in Winterfell burned day and night. Swords, shields, axes, spears, all hardened and reforged with dragon glass shipped quietly from Dragonstone through smugglers loyal to Davos Seaworth. Every able body was trained. Old maesters whispered old spells. The crypts of Winterfell were sealed shut, just in case. Jon rode back to the wall to deliver a final warning to Lord Commander Mormont. "The White Walkers are past the Frostfangs," Jon said. "We saw them. They're not marching south. They're already here." Mormont nodded gravely. "We'll hold the wall as long as we can. But when it falls, tell your father," Jon interrupted him. "He already knows." Meanwhile, in King's Landing, Cersei sat in her chambers with the latest raven trembling in her hand. The North is united. Stark and Son. Dragon glass weapons. Night's Watch confirms the dead war. She turned to Qyburn. "Send word to Euron Greyjoy. Tell him to bring fire. The kind that melts ice." Tywin, reading his own raven in the quiet of his solar, sat still for a long time. Then he spoke to his guard. "Summon the mountain. The time for games is over." Back in the north, an even darker shadow crept through the trees. Roose Bolton had vanished. One night, his tower stood empty. His banner burned. Ramsay was dead, but Roose lived. Somewhere, and he had taken a secret with him. He knew how to let the dead in. 1 week later, the wall sent its last raven. "Eastwatch has fallen. The wall is broken. They are coming. No more doubt, only war." And in the godswood of Winterfell, beneath the heart tree, Eddard Stark knelt in the snow and whispered the old words. "Forgive me for breaking my vows, but I will not kneel again, not to men, not to monsters." The leaves rustled. The North remembered, and it was ready. The North stood on the edge of its last dawn. Snow covered the land like a burial shroud, and the skies over Winterfell had turned a deep, lifeless grey. The horns had been blowing for hours low, mournful sounds echoing across the battlements. They were here. Jon Snow rode in first from the east, his black cloak torn and blood-stained, Ghost limping behind him. The wall was gone. Eastwatch had crumbled beneath the fury of the dead, and the Night's Watch was no more. "They've crossed the last river," Jon told Ned and Robb at the war table. "They'll be here by tomorrow night." Robb clenched his fists. "We'll hold them at the neck." "No," Ned said quietly, pointing at the map. "They don't take rows. They take everything. Outside, thousands of Northerners, farmers, smiths, boys too young to fight, stood behind the walls, trembling but ready. Their weapons were crude. Some held pitchforks tipped with obsidian. Others held torches. Everyone knew what was coming. No one had seen it and returned whole." That night, before the battle, Ned walked alone through the crypts of Winterfell. He stopped at Lyanna's statue and placed his hand on the cold stone. "I kept your secret," he whispered. "But your son fights beside me now. He is more a Stark than I ever was." He didn't say goodbye. There was no time left for that. By dawn, the sky was black with clouds. Snow fell silent and choking. The horns blew again, 3 blasts. The dead had arrived. From the woods they emerged. Thousands, tens of thousands. Skin stretched over bone. Hollow eyes glowing blue. Some still wore the rags of the Night's Watch. Others bore the sigils of dead northern houses. Even the bodies of old kings had risen. At the center, the Night King rode a dead horse, spear of ice in hand, face expressionless. Winterfell's gates held firm as flaming arrows flew and catapults thundered. Dragon glass traps detonated, sending shrapnel through the undead ranks, but they kept coming, wave after wave. Climbing over the bodies of their own, Robb fought like a wolf, unchained. Ice burned in Ned's hands as he cut through flesh that didn't bleed. Jon fought beside Arya, the siblings moving like shadows between the chaos. Sansa remained in the crypts, tending to the wounded, passing out daggers carved from obsidian with shaking hands. But the dead had come prepared. With one massive heave, they breached the gate, and the undead poured into the yard. Ghost leapt into the horde, buying time. A giant, reanimated and howling, smashed through the main hall, sending bodies flying. Then came the worst part. The crypts began to shake. Ned stopped mid-swing. "No," he whispered. But it was too late. The dead of Winterfell had risen. Ancient kings and long-forgotten warriors, awakened by the Night King's will. Bones wrapped in iron, dragging rusted swords, came walking through the dust and stone. Screams echoed through the halls. Ned turned toward the crypts, but Arya was already running. Jon grabbed his father. "We'll hold the gate. Go, save them." Ned didn't hesitate. He ran through smoke and flame, down into the dark. In the crypts, Sansa stood in front of the children, holding a dragon blast dagger, facing a dead Stark king whose crown still sat atop his decaying head. Just as the creature raised his blade, ice cut through it, splitting it in two. Ned stood there, breathless, bloodied. "Stay behind me." Together they cleared the crypts, burning the bodies, sealing the entrance with collapsed stone. Sansa sobbed, not out of fear, but relief. Her father had come back for her again. Outside, the battle was almost lost. Robb was surrounded, bleeding from his leg, shield shattered. Jon fell to one knee, his blade cracking in the cold. Then they saw him. The Night King. Walking calmly through the battlefield, untouched, his gaze fixed on Ned. It was him he wanted. Ned stepped forward, sword in hand, eyes locked. He didn't run. He didn't speak. The Night King raised his spear. But before he could throw it, a shadow leapt from behind Arya, silent as death itself. Dragon glass flashed once, and the Night King shattered like glass. All at once the undead collapsed. Silence fell over the north. Bodies lay in heaps. Smoke rose into the greying sky. The cost was unspeakable. But they had survived. Later, they burned the bodies. Every last one. Jon lit the pyres. Arya stood with Sansa, quiet. Robb sat alone, holding his crown, unsure what to do with it now. Ned walked through the courtyard, looking at his people. Those who still breathed, those who fought, and those who would never fight again. No songs were sung, no victory feast held. But Winterfell stood. The North had remembered, and this time it had won.